Hello, everybody, and welcome to our PDO's LinkedIn Live session, where we discuss about different topics to do with the account-based sales revolution. And for those of you who didn't manage to check out my LinkedIn profile before this, my name is Christopher, and I'm a business development manager here at our PDO. Firstly, I'd like to say thanks to our PDO for allowing me the trust to be able to present one of these sessions, and from my colleague Max letting me sit in his famous chair to be able to present for you today. As we are going to be discussing the power of data-driven leadership, and it is my first LinkedIn Live, I wanted to kick it off with a big bang. So for anybody out there who's a cold caller, Dave, I actually first cold called back last year, and thank God that he answered. So we're going to discuss all the topics today. So from all the way live from Texas, I'd like to introduce to you Dave Montana. Dave.
How you doing, sir?
Very good.
I like that you talked about the trust that's being put in you. Somebody foolish has allowed both an Australian and an English person to get on a live stream. So
Exactly.
anyone counting swear words may do quite well.
Yes, for viewer discretion, it might not be a PG-13 sort of viewing this one. That can be said, Dave. That's for sure. Well, look, thanks very much for joining us today. I mean, it's an interesting topic. We've got a lot we want to try and cover. Anybody out there, if they want to make a comment, and we could try and get to any questions, we'll see how we go for time. But Dave, let's kick it off with an introduction from yourself, and maybe you can share a bit about your own personal journey.
Yeah, currently leading sales for a company called Canonical, which not many people will know about, but everybody pretty much knows the product we make, which is Ubuntu Linux, the operating system. We make a lot more than that, but that's kind of the product that people know. Background, started in the British military, worked my way through there, took a few jobs in between, and here I am today. Too much to talk about in terms of each one, because I have one of these people that has done many things, but always knew I wanted to be in sales, and kind of everything was a mission to get there.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting. I mean, you starting off, you were in a military background, and I mean, your first role after that was IT analyst, which is something very different. So what sort of made you move into that area to begin with?
Well, actually, that wasn't the first choice when I decided where am I going to go, and I really wanted to be a photographer, and I was like, I'm going to be really creative. It's going to be amazing, and I bought a bunch of cameras, and actually ended up doing a lot of press photography, like TV shows like Big Brother. I was a photographer there for a long time. A lot of music photography, and then realized that creativity doesn't pay. If you want money, the top 1% at best get paid for creativity. So I was like, hey, what do I do that's got value in the world? Again, knew I wanted to be in sales, knew I liked IT sales. That was my degree as well. So I thought, let me actually be one of the few people in the world that uses their degree to make money. But also very aware that I'm kind of old school. You can tell by my haircut, having none. I'm a big supporter of that whole start in the mailroom and work your way up. So I was like, let me start doing the things that my customers are going to do so I can talk to them and know their world. And that's where that's why Army to IT analyst was a thing.
Perfect. I mean, military, IT degree, all the way through what you wanted to do in sales. I mean, you've worn a lot of hats, Dave. I mean, you even work for Red Hat. You must have a thing for hats.
Well, you need to, because with this haircut, I can only ever go outside wearing a hat.
I could sort of look at that and just think that's from the military days, and you've just kept it ever since. Perfect.
Let's go with that one.
All right, let's go with that. All right, so talking about that, so all of the previous experience, how has it helped you be successful and to sort of get you to where you are now at Canonical?
Honestly, I think that's one of the most undervalued things is people become better as they learn more, right? Like, and we get a lot of salespeople that are like, hey, I'm going to be the greatest salesperson ever. I'm going to start as an SDR, and in 3 years, I'm going to be making, like ridiculous amounts of money on commission checks. Yeah. In reality, that's an outlier. You can do it, but you're an outlier. What you need is time on the job, learning and growing every day. Work experience does that. Further education does that. I'm a huge supporter of actually like pursuing master's degrees, further education, professional classes, going and learning things. Like I went and did a PMP, either PMI, PMP, so I could just go learn about what project managers do. All of that will help you fine tune where you sit in the world, like
Yep.
what you're good at and what you're not good at, and pick where you are. So I couldn't pick out any one thing, but I can tell you that every day that you strive to be a better human and be better at what you do will contribute in the long term to the way you look at the world tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, Dave. Anyone sort of even tuning in now and they want to explore different areas. I mean, any sort of experience you get in everything, it's always going to build you up and just make you look more credible. Look, I think with all that information of your background, it gives us a good idea and will help us dive into the actual topic of the power of data-driven leadership. How about to kick it off? Why don't we do a sales favorite, the elevator pitch? So what is the power of data-driven leadership in your view as an elevator pitch? What salespeople love?
So I'm going to have to go back to the tried and trusted, right? Because I also love elevator pitches, but most people's elevator pitch is like the elevator, the like in Elf, where he presses all the buttons, and you're like, dude, I don't have 30 minutes. So I like to narrow it down to 3 specific areas, which is for, only, and because. So the for is like, who is the product for? The only is why are we the only people that can do this? And the because is why should you believe the claims that I've just made, the first 2 things. When we translate, it's hard work to translate that back to the power of data-driven leadership, but let me have a go.
Yeah.
So the for is it's really for you and the people you work with, and most importantly for the customers, as well as to some degree like the market and the investors if you're a public company, for the shareholders. So why, who's it for? It's for everybody that treats you as a stakeholder or everybody you have as a stakeholder. So the more you know about the customers and everything in between, it benefits everyone, right? So there's your for. The only, that's hard because as a seller, you want your only to be unique. Being data-driven isn't unique, but it is really rare. Very few people in an organization are data-driven. And I think more people need to be data-driven. So right now, there's this kind of rareness, right? So the only is, hey, I'm one of the few people that are doing this and are using this to their advantage. And because it's kind of self-evident when you become data-driven and you start to use data and you actually apply it in daily life, you're like, oh, wow, this works. Like who'd have thought data makes something happen, right? In my own world, I use it a lot to kind of identify the people that are around 80% of where you want them to be and get them past that, like get them moving. There are a lot of people that operate about 80% of their true potential. Yeah. The only way you can push them past that barrier is use data, and use data to identify gaps, identify skills, because there's another argument that should you do something 10 times that you're good at or fix that one thing that you're not good at? Well, you can use data to determine what's the best method, right? So the for only because is for, it's kind of for everyone, right? Only, it's very rare, so you become one of the only people doing it. And because you can track it back to an increase in sales and success. And if you want like the most basic thing, what does data do for you? I mean, look at we'll go back to military, right? Look at any military exercise where the risk is far greater than I won't make the sale. Data is key. Having an intel packet is key, right? So that's what we look at when we look at because, like, hey, more data equals better results. Yeah.
Now, I think that's a good explanation, and especially looking at military, if you can survive out on military, I'm sure in the boardroom, I mean, it gets hairy in there, but not quite like the military, that's for sure. But look, I suppose following up from that, Dave, so now a good probably baby steps, like how can people start using data-driven approach to start seeing these results? What should they be trying to capture? Where can they go from here?
I love that question because sometimes people go like too deep into too weird data. So people in general need a process, right? So they need the mission, the tactics, the strategy, and guidance, and then they should be able to determine what data do I need, or at least get close, right? Yeah. So some of the big things that I've seen, I'm trying to kind of pull out of the back of my mind here, but best practices and failure sharing and using like that anecdotal data is super important. And that's not real data that you can derive from Salesforce, but it's real data, right? So you really have to look at correlation versus causation, because they're not the same.
Yeah.
You need to look at causation, and you need to look at the correlations and go, well, why do they correlate? What's the causation? And you need to sit and kind of look at what makes a difference. If I see outliers, do those outliers need to be removed, or are they real and in there for a reason? What's really interesting is there's so many, and I'm going to kind of push this question away almost, right? But there are a lot of data science educational opportunities. Like you can go do coursera.org does a ton of free data science classes, and you can go learn from like Harvard and other very good educational institutes for free. All right.
Yeah.
So going and learning about data in general is something absolutely everyone should do. Then looking at your own business and the data you can collect and the data you wish you'd collect, and then make sure it's not absolutely irrelevant. Like, who cares about, kind of data that isn't going to affect your life? Like, yes, you can collect it, but should you collect it? So one of the hardest things to do is to start becoming data driven. You need to look at, what data do I need? What does it influence, and how does it influence my world?
Yeah.
I mean, if you want, I can go into some examples of things I use.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it would sort of follow up to my next question, because in sales, we're always talking about KPIs. And I mean, once again, that's to do with data and how important these numbers are. So this would sort of fall into the category of the key metrics that people should be looking for. So then they're wary of pitfalls that they could fall into about what data is worth keeping, what data is worth getting rid of. You're wasting your time. So any sort of process like that, I think, would be beneficial.
Perfect. Well, I will say for the most part, history repeats itself. So any historical data you can get is going to be incredibly useful. So the furthest back you can go get that data and create patterns and graphs and go look. Pattern matching is absolutely key. Like, if you can see a pattern, now a lot of the time, by the way, you need a third-party tool to help you do that. Modern tools can help you see patterns that you would never be able to see just looking at it as a regular human. So use tools to your advantage. I like to track the sales cycle overall, and some of the key things I look at are like deal velocity, like how long from first point of contact to a closed one is that deal. Within that, I like to look at the specific cycles and how long do they take, like how long does identification take? Yeah. How long does, negotiating take, so on and so on. And I break it all down into much smaller pieces. Yeah. By breaking it down, you can get a pattern of a seller, you can get a pattern of a deal type, and you can get a pattern of a customer, and you can kind of overlay all of those like a Venn diagram, right? You'd be like, hey, here's the common pieces. I like to look at lead source, because that's always a big deal. You talk about cold calling, right? Yeah. Like, how often is cold calling and expansion and hunting bringing you, and what's it bringing you, and a return on investment versus pure expansion? Yeah. I like to look at like new versus growth in general. I like a 60-40 split. You can only, like one of the old school sayings, you can only milk a cow so much, right?
Yeah. Runs out
of milk. It's a true statement. So you need to have a good balance between those. I also like to dive into market and vertical. I like to look at expenses to revenue. Like, is it expensive to make this sale? Something that most people don't consider in sales is, do I even want this sale? Is it the right thing for my company? That shocks a lot of sales leaders when you say, I don't want this sale. We're not going to make this sale. Maybe there's a reason. And data will sometimes give you, especially if you're in the support business and you're selling support for a product as well, is the cost of providing that support exponentially more expensive than the money I make from the sale? Yeah. So I like to look at things like that. I like to track failure points and success points. And again, you can do that with velocity and bookings. There's a ton you can see, but the kind of big ones are expenses to revenue, bookings, and you can subdivide those bookings, new versus growth, attach rate. If you're in the business of also selling consulting, we find that 10 to 15% attach rates about ideal. More than 15, you're not going to make more sales of annual recurring as a general rule. Yeah. Less than 10, you're kind of hurting yourself, and you're not going to get retention. Retention, another good one to track. Yeah. Velocity tracking, average deal size. And then another big thing is waterfall analysis. As a sales leader, I need to know when someone's kicking that can down the road and who's kicking that can down the road. Is it the customer or is it us?
Yeah.
So by tracking a lot of that, you get a lot of data. It's almost inexhaustible, but they're the kind of main ones that I look at.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so many different things you could be looking at tracking all the time, and even listening to that, because every sort of example that you gave with a piece of data being important, even when you have the salesman's worst nightmare when they lose the deal, then you can still go back and track through that sales cycle. Okay, where did it go wrong? So you can always be learning from mistakes, which is always something powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, perfect. All right. Well, look, I mean, Dave, we know it's the end of Q2. I'm sure there's probably a lot of people running around trying to get the deal closed before end of Q2. I forgive people who didn't join live because they might be closing deals, so they'll come back in a couple of days. Hopefully they succeed. I mean, do you now see the correlation between deals not being closed and the key data missing or not being maybe executed properly as well?
Absolutely. Too many people do the whole, hey, I've closed a deal and that's it. Forget about it, right? Not enough people look at a deal that failed and go, why did it fail? How did it fail? Where did it fail? And what can I do in future, right? Like history repeats itself, like I said earlier. So the more you know about the deal in general, like if you can know all of the key stakeholders, and then of course you've got influence charts versus org charts, which are very important.
Yeah.
And where did it fail? Why did it fail? Who am I competing against? What was a competitive marketplace look like? Was internal procurement involved? Did it fail? Like a lot of stuff these days fails in internal procurement, like the customer's procurement. You'll have done the deal and you'll have kind of, shaken hands with the person buying, but then procurement comes in and goes, by the way, I want 5 times the amount at half the cost.
Yeah.
So things can fail in multiple areas. I think we really need to start tracking that and looking for patterns. There is a large oil and gas company that I will not name where like that thing happens. Like the procurement department have been given guidelines and missions that are opposite from the buyers, right? So they're looking to, hey, I need to be able to reduce that cost and increase what I'm getting and get better value. Well, it's good to a point, right?
Yeah.
And it's good if your buyers are not good negotiators. But when your buyer's a great negotiator and then you get a different set of guidance from procurement, you will lose a deal on that.
Yeah.
So being able to see those patterns and be able to know that going in and then work with stakeholders, be like, hey, this is about to happen. It's out of your control. You can't do that unless you've got the data to be able to look at that and look at it over time.
Yeah, definitely. And then even sort of delving in even on that, because like times are different at the moment. I mean, we're looking at inflation, recession, things are different, like tracking even how it is today compared to how it was, during COVID was different again, before COVID was different, and sort of using all of that data to sort of get a good establishment. Okay, where are currently things looking at the market? Which sort of leads me to the next question. So how much do you sort of feel the power of data has changed for organizations over the years from how it used to be to how it is now, and what you think it could look like maybe in the future?
This is one of the kind of most exciting parts, I think, about being this age for me right now, is data is very different, going to be used very different, is being used very different right now, which is, and I'll kind of qualify what I mean.
Yeah.
We have 2 main buying groups. Main buying group number 1 tends to be in the C-suite, and they are Gen X, right? They're kind of the 1979, kind of prior to, not the boomer generation, but they're the people that like grew up as the latchkey kids, right? And that's my generation. We are the first generation ever to go from not having a computer to like hitting mid-teens and being able to get a computer. They're the first generation that's as comfortable in person as they are online, right? Whereas and they're a main buy, they hold the purse strings when you're selling to most companies today. But the key influencers are essentially what we would call the millennial generation. And they're coming in and they're influencing those guys and going, hey, I really don't like this thing. I don't want to use it. Or I love this. We should absolutely get this. They are sold to and marketed to in a completely different method, right? Like completely different. So what millennials think is important is not what Gen X thinks important. I'll give you a real world example. It's not related to data, but it was really interesting.
Yeah.
For the first time, I had somebody ask me in an interview, what is your company's attitude to environmental responsibility? And I was like, man, not a Gen X on the planet that would ask that question in an interview, right? So you start to see that they're motivated by different things. So the type of data and the influence and what we should be collecting actually changes with generational group. That's especially true in tech. Like if you're selling into tech and software and IT-based product, man, the millennials and to some degree the incoming Gen Z, they are absolutely motivated a different way. You need different types of data and you need different influences than you would need for the Gen X C-suite leadership or VP level leadership.
Yeah.
So first of all, that's a massive shift. So what we collect, how we collect it, and how you build those patterns is very, very different. And we need to understand what works for each of those main groups. The other big thing that we're seeing is AI/ML that we're all undergoing at the same time. That allows us to see patterns that you and I cannot see.
Yeah.
That allows us to do multiple realizations on some of that data. That's what's the most likely outcome. That is a fundamental step change. Multiple books have been written on this, since the kind of mid 1980s. And then 1990s when it really took off in terms of writing about the future. That future is starting to happen right now. So I'm really excited to see what's going on there and how we can use that to our advantage. AI/ML workflows are fantastic. What it will not replace is selling to Gen X because they're still shaking hands in person type of deal, but the data will help them make those decisions.
Yeah. I mean, even if we expand on that a bit more with AI, I mean, because AI, as we know, it's going to be able to pull data, it's going to be able to track it much more efficiently. And then how much of a real big impact do you think it can have on finally having data where it belongs and people can really take advantage of it?
So if I had to kind of make a sweeping statement, I would say that, discovering that you needed to wash your hands after operating someone, essentially bacteria, was one of the most major medical advances the world has seen, right? Vaccinations probably in there too, right?
Yeah.
We changed the landscape of the world by doing that. The most recent huge advancement in medical is human genome sequencing. We've been able to change how we treat people the world over because of the human genome. And you're like, that's great. We went through an industrial revolution back in the cotton mill days. I'm English, so I grew up in those towns. And then, we had the steam revolution, which pushed the industrial revolution. And then we had this IT revolution, which in reality was at its peak kind of late 90s, early 2000s, right? And we kind of saw this revolution. We saw the dot-com boom. And that was kind of the early start of the bubble there, right? And then, but we saw everything come into place and this massive change in how we approach the world. What's next? Honestly, it has to be AI.
Yeah.
It's still roughly somewhere in that technological revolution, but it's so different and it's going to influence so many different parts of the world that I'm really excited to see what happens and how people use it. What can we do right now? Well, we can do our own work and we can start to add in AI and ML to that learning. Again, go back to the very beginning, start collecting the right data.
Yeah.
But garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yeah.
But this is one of those things where I know I'm going to retire before we really see the absolute best that we can get from AI.
Yeah.
But I'm very excited to see what I can see.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to watch as well. I'm just praying we don't end up with another Skynet. Then it ends up in that situation. But well, we'll see. It'll be interesting to watch the space. It's really, especially in the last 6 to 12 months, it's just been the big hot topic, and it's always sort of been there in the background, but now it's really come to the forefront. So it could really help people, especially with being able to identify key data and go from there. So then it sort of leads to the next question where I would sort of say, okay, what do you recommend to people tuning in today? How can they start using this data to their advantage? And what are the first steps they should take?
The first step I would say was go get your historical data. A lot of that is going to come from, if you have a CRM tool, HubSpot, Salesforce, that kind of stuff, go get that data, put that data into a usable format. And that can be, Tableau amongst many other tools. You basically use a visualization, a BI tool to look at that data in ways you can understand. Also, I want to really point out that actually one of the best ways to understand things, just some people are very visual in terms of like, hey, use a BI tool. The most I learned was actually hand going through, and it took me a long time. It was a bit of a hobby, but I hand went through Excel exports from Salesforce.
Yeah.
Because for me, I learned from seeing the same thing time and time again. So by doing that manual work, I was able to really learn. But go get historical data, see where you have been, see which direction certain things are going. Like for products, we always, in this company, we always had a view that a certain product was like the king product, right? And it was, but we're seeing a shift in that with another product coming up very, very close, from behind and really kind of reaching kind of, if our key products up here, this thing's coming up like it's going to meet real soon. And we knew that, but we didn't know that proven by data.
Yeah.
So being able to prove it with data and then be able to take that to your customers and be like, hey, this revolution is coming. We have an answer. We have a solution. It's a great thing. So I would say start with historical data. Also have a mind of where you want to be. Be careful not to bias. There's always some bias in there, right?
Yeah.
Like people can make, there's an American saying, which like, it's not the votes that count. It's those who count the votes. Right. So you can always bias things to your own view. So be careful not to do that. Be careful to be you kind of take a step back and be like, what is this really telling me? But you will be able to fundamentally change how you approach data-driven work by just looking at the last 3 to 4 years.
Yeah.
Where have you been? Where are you going? I'm in Texas, so I was real careful not to go into Cotton Eye Joe right there. But you've got to really look at where do you need to be and how are you going to meet that, and then what do you need to map. Like I said, there's basic things like deal velocity and kind of return on investment and expenses to revenue that you need to track as a good leader and somebody good in your own account. Start mapping. A lot of individualized sellers treat the expense account like, hey, this is just an expense account. Start mapping that on your own accounts and be like, how much am I spending of the company's money to make this sale? Could I be doing something different, or could I go to company B and spend less and still make as much money for the company? Yeah. So start looking at your own, backyard and then start expanding out.
Yeah, I think that's a good advice, and especially if you're starting and you're beginning with collecting that data, don't be like a lot of companies where they've got a problem with leaky data as well. They're not capturing data, they're not storing it, it's not being corrected, and there's a lot of gold just sitting there that's not being properly executed. So, well, look, Dave, we're almost out of time. 30 minutes flies, especially when we have fun, when we're coming from Copenhagen all the way to Texas. Look, you've shared a lot of great information today. So for the final question, it's the big key takeaway. So, I mean, there's been a lot of information. If the viewers leave today and they have that one thing burning in their brain, one sentence, one line, what is it that you want people to remember?
I'm not good at that. I was swearing, so I'm gonna make a slightly longer statement, right? Which is, I made a comment earlier in the elevator pitch, which is being data driven is rare. Yeah, I want you to remember that, and remember that if you do adopt data driven ideals and you do use data to run your life, it's rare enough that you will be very successful and it will fundamentally improve your world. Yeah. So because it's rare, go do it and go stand out.
Perfect. Wonderful. See, then that makes sense. And I think that's a good one for people to remember. Easy takeaway. I think it was great. Well, look, Dave, I can't thank you enough for joining today, and for everybody else who tuned in online. Remember, if you want to catch more of these sessions, go on to LinkedIn, PDO, hit the like button, and follow Canonical as well. A good company, isn't that right, Dave? You love Canonical. Good stuff.
I do indeed. Yeah. I would love for more people to come learn about our product.
Yeah, perfect. So hope everyone's really enjoyed the session today, and we'll hopefully catch up with you again sometime soon.